Hey, good afternoon, Market Rebels, and to another round of Coach's Corner. And Stu, there's a
Yeah.
word that's floating around the markets these days. Do you know what that might be?
Well, there's a lot of them. Which one did you have in mind?
What would be the number one pick if you had to pick a word?
Right now, probably, I don't know, maybe Powell,
Actually, Powell,
tariffs,
Powell would be a good guess. Yeah,
tariffs, Netflix. I don't know. Any one number of them
that's volatility might come to mind.
might come to mind. Yep.
Yep. But there's one that's really the foundation of all of that, at least I think probably safe to say, and that is tariffs.
Tariffs, the big T,
The big T word.
big
So,
T.
unfortunately, there's a lot of misperceptions, really, in anything in economics or even the stock market for that matter. And but especially when it comes to economics, and in this case, tariffs. So I thought what might be kind of cool, a little different from what we normally do, which is focus more on options and strategies and stuff like that. But it is related because if you don't understand why tariffs are good or bad, or some of the stories you might be hearing, or I'm not worried about my company that's going to get hit with all these tariffs because they'll just pass it off to the consumers. That's another thing that you hear going on. So it can help you to make better decisions if you at least understand the basics of tariffs. So let's explore a couple of these questions here. So we're going to start off with our normal chalk talk for anybody who's new. We kind of give you a little thought-provoking question here. We'll come back at the end and answer it. But the question we have for you, can producers pass tariff costs to consumers? So if I'm the supplier, I'm going to get hit with these big tariffs. What you hear a lot of pretty much everywhere is, oh, they're just going to pass it off to the consumers.
Not so fast, right, Bill?
Not so fast, right? If you know nothing else from that Stu and I teach in Q&A, it's pretty much always it depends.
It depends. It
At
depends.
least hit the brakes and say, well, hold on a second. Based on what assumptions? What's
Yeah.
making you say that?
And everyone, just as a little side note, look, this is not, yay tariffs, no tariffs. Not,
No,
that's not this. We're just going to present the economics of tariffs and how they work, and
correct.
you guys, you're all free to come to your own conclusions. Of course, this is not a editorial. It's not an editorial. This
No,
is some of the math and the logic behind what's going on.
exactly right. So let's go find out. Good question here. Certainly relevant to today's market. Before we get started, as always, please remember right there on your screen, marketrebellion.com/get started. And that's going to take you to a very cool page where we've got lots of articles, videos, topics just like this to help you get a better foundation with options.
Bill, I
So
have a question. I have one question for you.
fire away.
How is it that a at the money straddle?
I think I know where you're going to go with this.
How stay with me? How is it that an at the money straddle in a $970 stock expiring today,
Today,
not next week, today, be $50+? So I'm not looking for an answer. I am saying
rhetorical
for,
question. Right.
for those and other answers to your questions, feel free to give us a call.
Yeah, because they are very good questions. You can see why a lot of people get led into the myths and misperceptions about options.
Time value. How can there be value if there's no time?
Right. 90% of options expire worthless.
Oh
All
my
the other
God,
nonsense that we
please,
hear. Right. And
please.
that's just going to get you into trouble. They're not trading strategies. So for
Or I
today,
have the magic answer, or
everybody's got the magic answer.
yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about economics here. Remember, this is a little different tack than we normally take, but again, it's related because it's very topical and will help you to perhaps make better decisions about is your company going to be affected, by how much, things like that. So let's talk about the economics of tariffs. Now, for anybody who's had a basic economics class, will certainly uh, realize and remember these if you stayed awake. Now, if you didn't, don't worry too much about the math and the graphs, because this is going to be a very short version,
It's all
jumping in
very
head first.
logical. just
It's more just to see if you can get the
common
I
sense, very
yeah, just
logic.
kind of follow along with
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Don't necessarily think you're going to learn this. We're going to take it a little fast, but we just want you to see the logic behind it.
yeah. That's all this
But the
is.
idea is that we have in economics, we have key topic is supply and demand. So
Mhm.
we have it could be shares of stock, it could be cars, uh, anything.
Anything could be.
There's
It could be an option at some level.
absolutely true for
Supply
sure.
and demand.
So what we're looking at on the horizontal right here, let me get my cool little pointer. What we're looking at on the horizontal is the quantity. If we are talking about the stock market, we usually talk about volume or the number of shares. But in economics, we usually just give it a generic word of quantity. So it's how many units are you selling? Now, another little footnote that a lot of people miss when they're looking at a supply and demand graph, it's always for some unit of time. It's never stated, but you have to just assume that it's there. So this might be for the year. It could be for the next month, for the next day. We don't know, but it's always per unit of time. And that's important because sometimes people say, well, wait a minute, maybe we're talking about trees. And they go, well, it doesn't really matter. We'll just grow new ones. Well, yeah, but you can't do it by next month. So we always have to say it's per unit of time that we have some resources here. And we have the amount over here. And then on the vertical, we've got the price. All right, so where these two lines cross is what we call the equilibrium, which should be the market clearing price. But first, let's talk about why these lines are the way that they are. It'll help you to understand the presentation a little bit better. The blue line is sloping upwards. And it doesn't have to be at that angle or in a perfectly straight line. That's just a stylized way to show that it goes from the lower left side of the chart to the upper right. All right. So what that's telling you that remember what the graph is showing, these are suppliers. So I'm going to use cars for this example. So what they're saying is that if the price of, let's give it a certain class of car, is 10,000, the US producers are willing to produce 100. Now, remember, this could also be in thousands, millions, but it could also be per unit of time. It might be for a week or a day. It's some unit of time. They're willing to produce 100. And as the prices go up, they're willing to supply more. So let's say at 20,000, the graph is showing that they're willing to supply 200. But if the price goes up, what happens? They're willing to, oops, what happened there? They're willing, that line gets pushed forward to the right. They're willing to supply more because it's a higher price. Suppliers react positively to higher prices. Now, what about the people on our side, usually the buyers? Let's say that cars are up here on the high end of the scale. We might say, okay, we're going to get 200 sales out of it. But if price comes down, what happens? Well, we get a little bit more excited about it. We're like, you know what? More people can now afford it. And so notice that it pushes that line out and we get more quantity or more sales. So what these graphs are showing is that with the blue line sloping upwards, is that higher prices tend to create more supply, and higher prices tend to create less quantity demanded, fewer sales. Lower prices do the opposite. We get lots of people who want to buy and not so many people who want to sell.
Unless it's the stock market. When that goes on sale,
Unless it's
everybody
the
wants to
stock
sell.
market. Right. So the place where these lines cross, again, where supply equals demand is called the equilibrium price. It's the balancing point. And it's also important because the market is trying to find this point because that's where revenue is maximized. So in the case of a market maker, this is why it's wrong when you hear a lot of people say, oh, the market makers are just jacking up the prices to unreal levels. No, they're not. If you want to believe that they're the greedy people that you think that they should be trying to maximize their revenue. And the only way they do that is to find this point. They want to clear that market. They don't want any leftover buyers or sellers. They want to clear all of that supply and demand out. And that's going to be done right there.
And any seller really wants to do that, right, Bill? I mean,
Absolutely true.
you
Yep,
don't
yep.
want You don't want to be stuck buying, if you're a buyer of whatever, you don't want to get stuck buying all this inventory and then you can't sell it.
Can't sell it.
And if the price is too high, you can't buy it. And how are you going to feed your customers? So there has to be a balance somewhere. And
Right.
that's what
Right.
Bill's talking about.
So now you can also see that some people would say, well, wait a minute, based on this graph, that some people, remember the demand is the gray line, some people are willing to pay 50,000. Looks like about 100 people. Why doesn't the manufacturer charge 50,000? Even
Good
though
point.
they could, they're not going to make as much money as
Right.
if they go to this point. That's
And
the
that is
answer.
because the demand is
Equal. Right. So that's very important. That's going to help you to understand a little bit more about the tariffs. Now, if we look at the tariffs here, let's look at, I'm sorry, back up here. If we look at this area in gray, this little triangle, in economics, this is what we call consumer surplus. And what this kind of a fancy word, what it means is that at a given price, let's say at 30,000, there we did have people that were willing to pay 50,000, but they only had to pay 30. We had some people up here that were willing to pay 49, but they only had to pay 30. So lots of people, it was the last people called the marginal buyers out here that were willing to pay 30 and they exactly paid 30. They didn't actually get any consumer surplus, but we should get right up to that point. So that's actually an important thing because it shows a benefit to society when we have lower prices. Almost everything that you buy, you're going to get a little bit, at least a little bit of consumer surplus. How do I know that? Well, ask yourself, you're on Amazon placing an order. Ask yourself, what if it was 1 penny higher? Would you still be buying it? 50 cents higher, $1 higher? Most of the time we'd say, well, of course. Well, then there's a net benefit to you. And so that's shown right there. For the suppliers, it's down here. This supplier down here might be a low cost producer saying I'm willing to do it at, or a small producer willing to do it at 10,000, but he's getting 30,000. This guy over here, if we walk up this blue line, says I'm willing to produce maybe at 11,000, 12,000, whatever, as we start walking up this line, but they're all getting 30,000. They're getting a lot more money than they really are expecting or that they would really even need to make the business work. So that's a benefit to them.
Mhm.
All right. So now let's clear these out. Keep in mind our X marks the spot. Let's bring in the world now. All right. So now we have a world supply. Remember, we're going to use cars in this example. And the world supply is flat. And I just said a moment ago that the supply line is upward sloping. Why is this one flat? Good question. Well, this is, remember, the domestic supply, in my example, supply of the US. When you bring the world into the picture, the world can handle this quantity. This is just peanuts for the world. Might be a lot for our manufacturers, but it's peanuts for the world. So what this graph is saying is that pick the number of cars that you want. You want 200 at this price, got you covered. 300, 400, 500, no problem. That's
Think
why it's
like think like GM can produce X
right
model, X cars.
per
But then
month
when
or
you throw
whatever.
in, I don't know, Maserati, or Honda. I know, Honda might be a bad example because a lot of that is actually made here in America. But just you
True.
say Honda is Japan. When you throw in that Mercedes, right? Most of Mercedes is coming from Germany. When you throw in
Kia,
that,
all of them.
it can meet the demand that is present here.
Correct. So that's exactly what that's showing. Now, we can see that if you look at where the red line crosses the blue line, what we're saying is that domestic suppliers, US suppliers, are going, if prices are 20,000, I'm not that motivated. We're only willing to supply 200 collectively.
Yeah,
Remember, the
not
blue
enough
line
money.
is just the US, red line is the world. So the US producers are saying, okay, we're willing, we used to do 300 right here up at this price, but now at the lower price, we're only willing to do 200.
Yeah, think oil companies, right, Bill? Like
Yeah,
at lower prices, they don't really want to drill because there's
of
not enough
course not.
money in it.
They're
Yeah.
exactly right. Now, but look at where the red line crosses the gray. This is the demand side. Now remember, this is US demand. US citizens are going, holy smokes, at 20 grand, We're willing to buy 400 cars. We used to only be willing to buy 300, but now we're willing to do 400. So the question is, if the US is producing 200 cars and the US demands 400, how is it doing that? How is it filling this gap right here? Those are the imports. All right, so those are the imports that are filling this excess demand based on the lower prices. All right, so keep that in mind. Now, let's go back to our consumer surplus right here. Take a look at this triangle. All right, that's a big triangle. We get lots of a net benefit to society with the lower prices. But now watch what happens here. We're going to add a tariff, and what that does is it shifts that red line vertically by the price of the tariff. And the bigger the tariff, you can see what's happening here, at least you will shortly, it's going to really start squeezing these imports. So what's going to happen here? Well, now the price you can see is, let's call it maybe 28,000.
It's going
It
up.
crosses the blue line a little higher. So now at 28,000, US producers are going, hey, we're a little more motivated to produce. All right, so they're going to bump it up here. And then the foreign manufacturers are doing what? They're going to produce less because of the tariff. So notice what's happening is that, what is that? Oh, so if you look at our triangle right here, you can see that it's getting squeezed. It used to be the black, but now at the higher prices on the green, it's this gray area. So you can see what's happening is that these are getting squeezed right here. We used to produce here in the US this much, but now we're expanding. And the foreign producers are doing what? Coming in this way
Less.
because of the tariffs. So they're actually squeezing the imports. They're making this part smaller. Now, what's happening? People say, oh, but it's better because we're getting more money. Well, hold on, not so fast. We can't forget this triangle up here. So notice that the triangle used to be in black. Now it's in gray. That's just the black part plus the bottom here in green because of the tariffs. So we are worse off by this area. And that's a huge hit to society. Maybe not to General Motors workers, but remember, everybody counts and everybody counts equally. The rest of the US is going to get docked with higher prices. So keep in mind this little shape right here is what we've lost. But all of it's not lost. Over here, it's kind of this little odd shape right here, is the producer surplus. All right, now this shape over here, I should have done this one first. This right here is now our imports. Notice the imports used to be this big green area. Now it's this little one. It's gotten, again, squeezed.
The manufacturers of the imported cars are producing less.
Or shipping less, right.
Shipping less.
Exactly. Yep. So what happens, though, so this is a loss here. However, it's also a gain by the fact that the government is getting the revenue. So they are going to get some tax from it. So that kind of becomes a wash. But take a look at right here and here. What do you notice? Those two little triangles are left out. Now, remember when we first did this, we had this shape that was here. That was like this, from the green down here to this, that shape. That's the part that we lost, the bottom part of that triangle. We regained the yellow from taxes. But and then over here, I mentioned that before, this little white area is producer surplus. It's the US producers who are better off because of the higher prices. But take a look at what never got brought back, the two red triangles. And in economics, they call that a dead weight loss area. Those are trades, or in this case, sales, that would have taken place that never will. They are gone forever. And that is a net loss to society, period. So like Stu said, this is not a political thing, whatever you want to talk about. It is absolutely, the tariffs create a net loss. Now, sometimes people say, well, then why do countries do it? And that's a really good question. There's a lot of reasons why they could be done. Some of them might there's something called an infant industry. Let's say if you're trying to I don't know, break into the chip manufacturing business and China's going to dump a bunch of chips on your market and crush your industry. You might say, oh, you know what, let's let this industry kind of get off on its feet. US doesn't have that problem. We just don't have that problem. We're a big consumer. We usually need the imports to feed our needs. And now you're going to cut them out. And that is not going to be a benefit. Now, again, can it help the US steelworkers? Of course it will. No argument. But what about the other 99.9% of the population that's going to get harmed? See, that's the argument. And that's why the tariffs, from an economic standpoint, are bad. It's because there is a net loss to society.
See, an automotive plant may get opened here in the States,
That's right.
and it may
Absolutely.
provide some additional jobs for
Absolutely.
that area. But for everyone, it works out to a net not a benefit.
Right. So, like,
It's
for
a benefit
instance,
for a few, but it goes the other way for the masses as a whole.
right. An example I often give is that if I used to be able to pay 20,000 for a car, but I've got a 30,000 budget up here, let's say, I can also buy a car, but I could also spend 10,000 on a boat. But if you make me spend 30,000 on the car, you are actually harming the boat manufacturer.
You're hurting the boat guy, right?
Yeah. So you're saying, hey, rah, rah, let's help the US steelworkers or let's help General Motors. They'll have more money. They'll spend more money. Everybody's going to have more money. Absolutely false. It has to harm somebody because you can't spend the same dollar twice.
Bill, what was the name of that thing we were talking about? The Iowa
Oh, the Iowa car crop. Yeah, we're going to do that. We might actually
Iowa
do
car
that in
crop.
Coach's Corner.
Yeah, Iowa car crop.
That's kind of the
Really
same
interesting.
idea here.
Yeah.
Correct. That's a real eye opener. So anyway, there's the short version of why tariffs are bad in the eyes of an economist. And you'll see a lot of articles saying, the administration's economically illiterate, and this is why they're talking about it.
Yeah, this
You,
is where
you,
all the
you can't
recession talk
say,
is coming from. The recession isn't about, oh, my neighbor's going to get a job or my neighbor's out of a job. The recession is about what's happening with the entire country,
the entire country.
GDP, all that kind of thing. It's not Havertown, Pennsylvania. It's the states as a whole.
Right. And there's also another thing when we talk about GDP, let's say from a recession, one of the reasons it's so devastating is that you cannot recover lost time. So even though you might say, hey, we're back on track now, we're back into plus GDP, doesn't matter. You were negative last quarter or the quarter before or last year. You cannot make that up.
Bill, is that code for like we lost the compounding effect?
We've lost the compounding effect. That's exactly right. So the point is that it is absolutely a net loss. There's no disputing that. And so this is really when you start reading a lot of the articles saying, economic illiteracy and they're not understanding what's happening and why it's going to be a net loss. We wanted to bring this to you to show you kind of the details of why that's true.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to take another step. And before we do that, quick reminder, marketrebellion.com/get started. You know the reasons, right? Lots of cool articles and things to help you make better decisions. But now let's ask a question. Can sellers pass off a tariff? You hear that a lot too, right? I hear it almost every day. Oh, they're planning on passing it off to consumers.
Right. Yep. The car was 30 grand. Now it's
Yeah,
30
they'll
grand
just or
plus,
20
plus
grand, now it's 30. We'll
3,000.
just pass it off to consumers.
Bill will buy the car. So what?
Is that true? Well, economics has something to say about that. So we're going to go back to our graph right here. I told you it would come in handy. And we've got our supply line. You know what that's from. You've got our demand line. You know what that's from. And we have our equilibrium price. All right, so in this case, I've changed the example. We have 500 sales at a price of $100 per unit. So this manufacturer has a revenue, not a profit, but a revenue of 50 grand.
Mhm.
All right, that's just price times quantity, price
Yep.
times sales. It's the area of that box. But now, let's say that there is a tariff. And so what the supplier is thinking is, hey, no problem. I'll just pass it off to my customers.
I'll just
I
raise
still
the
want to do
price.
500 sales per unit of time. Don't forget
Uh-huh.
that. That's per unit of time. And so in my mind, what I want to do is to shift this green line higher. I'm trying to do this. That point was lined up right there. I'm trying to shift it up so that this difference, let's say it's a $10 tariff. So in my mind, I'm thinking I'm just going to shift that line up by 10 bucks.
10%. Yep.
So the problem is, if you look at where that blue dot is, it's not an equilibrium point.
Are the same number of people going to be buying
Buying at that price.
at that $110 price?
Correct.
And the answer
We're
is,
saying here's, yeah, see, that's going to make the price 110. Well, look at where the equilibrium is.
yeah.
See, it's down here.
This is where that whole elasticity
Yeah,
discussion comes in.
exactly. I've got some clips here about that. Good
Okay.
point. But now, based on the way that I've drawn this, it's kind of a splitting the difference. The seller's going to have to eat $5 of it, and the consumer's going to have to eat $5. But make no mistake about it, the consumer is not going to just pay the full 10. So I did an article here recent, I think it was last week in our
Yeah.
option school, talking
Outstanding
about
article.
this effect. And it's, I think I led off saying if it were so easy to just pass costs off,
Why aren't they higher?
why would you wait for a tariff?
Right.
Why would
Right.
the manufacturer, if the manufacturer can go, oh, just charge $10 more, we'll just pass it off to consumers. Well, why didn't you do that years ago?
I think they kind of do that. They call it MSRP.
Well, yeah, that's all.
We'll just make it higher.
We'll just
Think about it. I
tack
mean,
on
it
this
really makes sense, right? So if a bag of popcorn is $5, well, why not make it $10? Why not make it $20?
or 50. We just say, hey, don't worry about it. We'll just pass it off to the consumer. See,
Right.
the problem that when people make that argument, they're failing to recognize that yes, the seller has that right to say, I can choose my price.
That's right.
But what they're failing to recognize is that the consumer also gets a
Also
choice.
has the right
It
to
can
what they
say,
want to
I'm not
pay.
paying your price.
Exactly.
Right. And if you really think about it, you'll see that that's very true. Like I make most of my living based on Microsoft products, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. I think that's safe to say most of what I do is done in those documents. What is it, like 160 a year?
Yeah.
Do it through the cloud now? You
Yeah.
don't think I would pay 200 bucks a year for it?
Yeah.
Or 400 bucks, 500? Am I getting some consumer surplus from that? Oh, a ton. So the question is, if Microsoft is this big greedy monopoly, why aren't they charging $1,000 for it? Why aren't they charging $5,000 for it? And the answer is they put more money in their pockets by charging 160.
Less by charging less. Yeah.
Right. That's the way that
Really
the math
interesting.
works out. I
Really
know it
simple.
is. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Just so counterintuitive, but
It is
so
very counterintuitive, like a lot of stuff in economics. So let's
yeah.
take a look here. Now that by the way I've drawn this, our new equilibrium is at 300 at 105. That's 31.5. So your manufacturer here that thought he was just going to pass everything off to the consumers,
He's got less money.
he's down 37%.
I hate when that happens.
Yeah, that's a hit.
Yeah, that's a hit. Even though he
Now,
raised the price, it's a hit.
he raised the price and it's a hit.
Yeah.
So now here's the thing. What if the supply and demand shapes didn't look like this? Now, what Stu had mentioned before, we can change the pitch. Remember, I said this is kind of a stylized drawing. We know that the demand line slopes downward from left to right, going from this way, sloping downwards from left to right. We know the demand line goes sloping upwards from left to right. But do they have to be at that angle? No.
No.
Depending on the product, they have different what are called elasticities of demand. So let's say it was something like this. Now, what this is telling us, as we get more vertical, it's becoming more inelastic. What it means is that consumers are more insensitive, not totally insensitive, but more
More
insensitive to
insensitive to
prices.
price. Right.
Yeah, it was 100, now it's 103. Who cares? Buy it. It's 105. Who cares? Buy it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They might back off a little bit, but they're basically going to just blow it off. And some products are like that. This is actually, little side note here, one of the big goals of marketing is to try to make a product have an inelastic demand. And one of the companies that has done a remarkable job of that is Apple. You talk to the Apple heads out there, you can say, well, they've got a new Samsung phone here that's 400 bucks, and they've got the Apple went up to 2,000. Don't care. I'm paying 2,000. It's now 2,200. Don't care. They just don't care.
Yeah, that's the
And
cult.
that is a phenomenal, uh, just tremendous respect to be able to do that with a brand. And that's graphically what advertising is trying to do. It's trying to make that demand more inelastic.
Yep,
So that
tribute to
you're
the
not going,
marketing
you know,
and
that
advertising.
Samsung phone is $200 cheaper. Let me, they've gotten their demand curve more inelastic.
Mhm.
Now, things like uh, maybe cigarettes and alcohol might fall, and they actually might be even more inelastic. That's part of the reason why governments put the taxes there. It doesn't affect sales much because
Because
people
they can.
because they can. People just, cigarettes are $2 a pack, they're five. I don't care. Got them eight
Yeah.
bucks a pack.
10 bucks,
Doesn't matter.
15 bucks. I need my cigarettes. I'm going to
Right.
buy them.
So they just don't complain. Sales don't really get damaged. They get their revenues. For the people it does deter, maybe it's a net benefit for them. But that would be a product that would be
In the big world, right? Maybe
more
because now they get feeling better and they live longer, or maybe that's not a cost benefit, but it's a big picture. It's everybody. It's the whole.
right. But now, what if we go to now? This is really getting into some
How
theoretical.
complicated it can get. It's like, where
For
does it
sure.
stop?
But now take a look at this. If we go perfectly inelastic, now what this is telling us is that for this unit of time, people are saying we need 500 units. I don't care what the price is. Remember, this is 100, 105, 110. I don't care. 200, 300, 400. I need 500 units. When I say I, it's not a single person, it's the community or the country, whatever it is. But they're saying, I don't care about the price. Now, think about how many products people say, I don't care about the price. These are going to be things probably like insulin or some type of a drug that's required to sustain life. This is also part of the reason why the government will come in and subsidize these. They'll say, well, because people would just charge an absolute fortune for them. So let's try to subsidize it. But now you can see if you have a product that has purely inelastic demand, and trust me, there aren't many out there, if any at all, that's the only time you could pass off the price to the consumer. See, now we do meet right there on that green line. But
And,
any other case, you got to look. Most of your publicly traded companies are not going to be in that category.
yeah, those
They're
products are very far and few between.
very few and far between. Your companies are absolutely going to take hits for sure. So that's one of the reasons why we're thinking, well, they are potential, they're definitely potential problems, but they're also potential opportunities. But you, as a trader, investor, however you want to categorize yourself, speculator, need to understand this to say, here's what we're up against. And maybe, just maybe, people are going to realize this is not doing people any good, and we're just going to either abolish the things, defer them, reduce them. Um, we also know that it's been in economics forever of the retaliatory tariffs, which we've seen. We knew that was going to happen. So then you have to say, in the end, does it really help anyone? And we'll leave that up to you to decide.
Yeah.
But those are
So
some things to think about when you are trading your companies, holding your companies. Do not think that they're just going to pass it off to the consumers.
it's
So
not
for
that easy.
it is definitely not that easy. So can producers pass tariff costs to consumers? I said no, but there's one exception, and that is if they have a perfectly inelastic demand curve or largely inelastic, they might be able to pass off 90 or 95%. But I would really kind of challenge people to find products that would fit that bill. Not too easy to find.
Right.
So anyway, we hope that gives you some good things to think about. I know it was a little different tack here, but we thought very timely, and that's
Finally,
really
yeah.
what we try to do. So options also are not just about understanding your strategies and your pricing principles and hedges, rolls, morphs. It's understanding the big picture. It's understanding the backdrop that you're operating against. Is this a good time to buy? Should I be
And,
leaning towards more insurance or more towards in the money? What's
and
going to be happening? And
this
hopefully this gives you
discussion,
some things
this
to think about.
discussion can also be brought down to a level of uh, understanding the mechanics of the marketplace,
For sure.
where a market is a market. What is the market? Where's the market coming from? How is the market created? The market's an auction place. There's buyers, there's sellers, there's more buyers maybe at a lower price, maybe there's more sellers at a higher price, and how does that work? And just that whole balance. It's a
Yep.
very similar concept here.
It is. But once you start realizing the simplest answer is that tariffs raise prices, and when prices are higher, people pay less. And if people say, "Well, my supplier is just going to pass it off to the consumers," maybe. But if even if that's the case, let's say if I now have to pay 30,000 for a car instead of 20,000, what do you know with 100% certainty? That I have 10,000 less to spend elsewhere.
Right.
So yeah, maybe they can pass it off to some people, but make no mistake about it, it's going to have a net downdraft on GDP. It has to.
Bill, does that mean if you're what do you have? A Ranger?
Oh, Frontier.
A Frontier. So does that mean if your Frontier cost a material amount more, you wouldn't have that boat?
Exactly right.
It
Yeah.
could, right? The answer could
Yeah,
be
the
very
answer is
much.
right. We talk about that in our SEALs class. It's easy to overlook the things you see. I've actually got a trimaran sailboat. I've got a motorboat. You wouldn't see those, but if they weren't in the driveway, you'd be led to think, oh, well, it didn't hurt him. Look at that. He's got a car, and GM now, or a Nissan has more money. So we're better off. Well, no, because what you're
Not really.
missing is that I would have had other products here that never ever came into existence. And that's why it's really hard to figure out what's going to happen on the net
And then think of the
effect.
trickle effect, right? So if he doesn't
Oh,
have
for
the
sure.
boat, right now he doesn't have to buy the gas for the boat. He doesn't have to buy parts for the boat, which means now the parts people are now suffering a little
For
bit.
sure.
And it just kind of goes on forever.
And that's so if you're also wondering why did the market sell off so heavily, hopefully now you see why, because it's just a big dark cloud over the market's head. We're going, we have no idea what this is going to do to the economy. And so one thing I'm going to leave everybody with a little prediction, which I normally don't do. I'm not a fan of predictions for obvious reasons, but start watching for the words unintended consequences. Didn't we do a coach's corner on that?
We did, I
I think we
think.
did. Go back and look. I know we were talking about it, but go back and look that one up, and you will absolutely start seeing unintended consequences, industries collapsing, and things that nobody saw coming. And that
Mhm.
will really show you just how intricate the economy is. So just kind of watch for that. If we happen to see any, maybe we'll bring them up on a future Coach's Corner. But we hope that helps you for now. We want to
Yeah.
wish everybody a great rest of the trading week, and hopefully we'll get some kind of a spark going under us here. And we'll look for you next Thursday on Coach's Corner. We'll see you then.